everyone. Welcome to the 5 Beer Plan. I'm Brian, and this is the ongoing saga of an everyman's ale trail. In this episode, it's time to go back to the ale trail for a rainy crawl, heat up the wort in my homebrew project, chat with Steve Corbin from Feedstore Beer Company, and review a complex coffee stout from Maine Beer Company. But before we get this party started, here is this episode's burning question. What is your favorite coffee stout? Mine is one from Flying Machine Brewing Company, located in Wilmington, North Carolina. This beer came via Beer Pal John. Fireside Folklore is a 6.3% ABV coffee stout. It is a dark pour and has light roast coffee notes on the nose. It is soft and slightly effervescent, coating the tongue with a bitter dark chocolate on the finish. A perfect cold weather quaff. Beer ventures are always a lot of fun. On my most recent trip to the West Coast, I found a small area of the Ballard neighborhood north of Seattle that had some breweries that I had not yet tried. So off I went. A friend and former coworker Harry had relocated to Seattle, so I made plans to meet with him at Bale Breaker and Yonder Cider House after work. Since I was dealing with a 3-hour time change, my workday started a lot earlier than most, which meant I could get a head start on the evening's festivities. One of the things I embraced and learned this visit was using the public transportation, which is a lot less expensive than taking a Lyft or an Uber. As I walked to the bus stop, the weather turned from a previously misty morning to a drizzly day. But I was not about to let that put a damper on my activities. For anyone out there who has reservations about taking the bus in a major city you are not familiar with, using Google Maps is a great way to take the guesswork out of it. Simply choose your starting and ending point, and then choose the public transportation feature, and then you will know exactly where you have to transfer buses or to hop off. It's pretty simple. My first destination was Great Notion Brewing. I've been there before, but was feeling like it had been too long since I had one of their big IPAs or stouts. I looked back, and the last time had been over 3 years ago, definitely too long. Once I hopped off the bus, I made a beeline for the Ballard Tap Room. I passed by Reuben's Brews, another favorite Seattle brewery. There were only a handful of people at this time of day in the tap room, so I sat down between two parties at the bar. Jimmy was serving beers behind the bar, and I ordered my flight of 5 beers, 2 sours, 2 NE IPAs, and an Imperial Coffee Stout. There was an additional one that caught my eye, a bourbon barrel-aged Imperial Stout, but it was by the can. I decided to pop on it and let it warm up while I enjoyed my flight. The couple to my right, Dan and Jen from Minnesota, were super friendly. We talked about the podcast, homebrewing, and the battle for the NFC North. The beers were great, exactly what I had hoped for. Oh, and that BBA double stack, simply amazing. Soft and silky on the palate, with dark chocolate and coffee throughout. It had a great boozy burn, too. And because I had more places to go, I left the remainder of the can as part of my tip for Jimmy. Pay it forward, my man. Since I spent a lot longer than I expected with my new friends, I needed to forgo Reuben's and double time it for another quick stop in another new-to-me brewery, Wheelie Pop. Again, it was still kind of early, and so there was nobody else but me and the barkeep Tom. I found out that the name comes from the original owner's love for motorcycle racing. I had a quick flight that included an Italian Pilsner, a German Pilsner, and a couple of IPAs. My favorite was not surprisingly the Nectarone Hop IPA. I would love to go back in order to spend more time at this brewery. I got a text from my friend and knew it was time to head to Bale Breaker, which was just a few blocks away. It was still drizzling a bit as I arrived at the brewery. The taproom was pretty busy, but Harry and I found a place at the bar and began to catch up. Brandon, the manager, helped us out behind the bar. Apparently, Bale Breaker and Yonder Cider are owned by the same family, which is pretty unique. He also let us know that this was a 4th-generation farm business. I definitely want to learn more. The great thing is that with both beer and cider on tap, you could mix and match your flights, so I chose to split it down the middle, enjoying an IPA, a dark lager, and a couple of ciders. The dark lager and the pear cider were the highlights of my flight. My friend had to leave, but I continued to talk to Brandon and those around me. We started talking about food, and I heard that Giddy Up Burger down the road was a great place for both food and beer, so I departed BBYC and made my way for a burger. As I exited the venue, I was greeted by a heavier rain than what had been falling hours before. The streets were not well lit, and so I wanted to be very careful of traffic since I was wearing a dark blue raincoat. Ironically, the first step I took, I stepped square into a puddle, soaking my foot all the way through. I was on too important a mission to let that distract me. When I arrived, Giddy Up was packed. I ordered a burger, some fries, and a Kolsch from Hellbent Brewing. I had to make my way to the bus stop, but I still had stops at Aslan Brewing and Schilling Cider House on my mind. I trudged on to Aslan and had a couple of 5-ounce pours of beer that I had not previously enjoyed. Sadly, it was not as magical as my first visit there 2 years ago with my brother-in-law, but that sometimes happens when you're going solo. Beer crawls in general are always more fun with a friend. Even though it was raining, there were still a surprising number of people out and about on this dreary Thursday night. So head down, I pushed ahead to Schilling, which was 10 minutes away. Suddenly, a small, cheery sandwich board caught my eye shortly after I set off. It read, Mr. B's Meadery, Honey Wine, with an arrow pointing to some steps leading downward. The old saying goes that curiosity killed the cat. I was of course intrigued by this new find and carefully traversed the slippery stairs. I opened the door to a small quaint space with maybe room for no more than a dozen people. It was decorated in a whimsical fantasy vibe, and there was nary a seat to be had. Anna greeted me from behind the bar and gave me the lowdown on the mead. There were 17 meads available, both still and sparkling. So I stood at the end of the bar and ordered a flight of 4, with my favorite being Holy Buddha, which was brewed with Buddha's hand, apple, and holy basil. Bethany was a regular there and told me that Elliott Bay Brewing in West Seattle was one of her go-tos. Boy, I wish I had more time to spend at Mr. B's. This was really unexpected, but a real Ballard neighborhood gem worth dropping into if you get the chance. My last stop of the night was in sight. I walked in and sat at the brightly lit bar and perused the cider menu while Carly waited on a steady stream of customers. It was clear that I was doing nothing to bring up the age curve in this place. There were 16 Schilling ciders on tap with an additional 8 guest taps. I was happy that the flights were 6 because it was so hard to choose. I settled on moonberries made with blackberry, blueberry, and lavender, Excelsior Imperial Pineapple, Excelsior Imperial Apple Pie, Excelsior Imperial Berry Massive, Mountain Mule, and finally Scrumpy. My least favorite was Scrumpy, which was a dry cider. The rest of the ciders in my flight were all solid, but if I had to choose a favorite, it would have to be the 8.4% ABV Berry Massive. Sweet, smooth, and just chock full of berries. I had planned my trip well. The bus stop was less than a block away. As I hopped on, I was reminded what a great evening it had been. It wasn't just another rainy night. It was another ale trail adventure I would cherish for some time. In this segment of Homebrew Hijinks, it's time to kick off the boil on the small-time chocolate porter. Once the mash was completed, I used the fly sparge method to extract as much of the sweet, sticky wort from the grain as possible. This also helps me to get to the proper volume of wort for the boil. I had prepared 1.5 gallons of water heated to 169 degrees Fahrenheit for the sparge. I poured it over the grain bag 2 cups at a time until it reached my pre-boil volume of 1.75 gallons. After each pour, I squeezed the grain bag to extract more of the wort. Previously, it was not easy with bare hands, but since getting some high-temperature brewing gloves, it was much more bearable. I'm still working on making this process a bit more repeatable, but for the time being, this seems to work well. I took a pre-boil gravity reading and got 1043, which was 14 points below what I expected. So I did a quick calculation and found that approximately 1/4 pound of sugar would push me to the numbers I needed. So I opted for some dark brown sugar and would add it near the end of the boil. I'd also prepared my hop schedule while the grain was mashing. This would be a 60-minute boil, So I added 3 grams of Chinook hops to my hop basket as soon as the wort was boiling, and then 3 grams of Cascade hops when there were 15 minutes left. During this last hop addition, I added the 1/4 pound of dark brown sugar to the wort and 1 ounce of cacao nibs to the hop basket. I hoped that this would give me a bit more sugar to ferment and a bit more of what I hoped to be a dark chocolate undertone. Once the boil was complete, I took an original gravity reading and with a temperature correction measured 1076, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. So thankfully, the last minute addition of sugars helped push me to where I needed to be. Next episode, it's time to pitch the yeast. Now, it's time for Barstool Banter. This episode, I go to what used to be known as the Great Beer Desert of Indiana, where Steve Corbin from Feed Store Beer Company in Bloomfield, Indiana, shares a lot of information about the brewery and what it was like to rehab a commercial property. His is one of those small-town, Midwestern success stories that I love to hear about. Welcome to Barstool Banter. I'm sitting down with Steve Corbin from Feed Store Beer Company in Bloomfield, Indiana. Steve, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me on the podcast.
No problem, man.
So, what is your role there at the brewery?
My wife and I own the brewery, and I'm the head brewer as well.
Okay. A lot of craft, nano, and microbrewery owners are bivocational. Is Feed Store your full-time gig?
No, I'm an engineer by trade,
Okay. What kind of engineering?
electrical engineer.
I'm a mechanical engineer myself, so.
Okay. The hobby seems to draw a lot of us.
Yeah, is it the technicality or is it the creativity or a combination thereof? I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's for sure a little bit of both. It is funny to see how the engineering mindset goes towards brewing versus some of my more artistic-minded friends.
And perhaps it's kind of the whole scientific method because much like cooking or baking, you've got a recipe that you're following and steps that you're following and targets that you're trying to hit. So maybe there's something from that aspect too that maybe draws us gearheads into the craft a little bit more.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me how long has Feed Store Beer Company been open?
We opened in October of 2020, so about 4.5 years closing in on that.
Okay, cool.
We bought the building in 2017, so it took us a little while to get open, but it's existed in my brain for about 9 years almost.
Okay. So did you homebrew then before you became a commercial brewer?
Yeah, I homebrewed for, I don't know, about maybe 5 years prior to that.
So I know Feed Store Beer Company is located in Bloomfield, Indiana. Kept thinking Bloomington. That's what it was going
Yeah,
through my mind is Bloomington. Is that close to
it
Bloomington?
is actually. We're about 30 minutes southwest of Bloomington, hour and a half south of Indianapolis.
Okay, so you truly are considered then Southern Indiana as far as
Yeah,
the geography goes.
yeah, we're right on I-69, about halfway between Indianapolis and Evansville.
No kidding. Okay. 69, runs up right where my area is
Yeah,
geographically. So
and it's a beautiful drive.
not in the snow.
No, not at all.
What's the beer scene like there in Southern Indiana?
It's growing, as I'm sure you can imagine. The rural Midwest is certainly behind the coast as far as trends go. I read an article when we were getting ready to open about brewing in Indiana, and I think it was written about 10 years or so ago. And they referred to the area west of Bloomington and kind of south of Lafayette, all the way down to Evansville, as the Great Western Beer Desert of Indiana. There were hardly any breweries in the area outside of Bloomington, being a college town that got quite a few and have for a long time. So we've introduced a lot of the locals to craft beer, and it's been an interesting journey. We've made some good friends here that wouldn't dream of drinking craft beer until the first time they came in and tried it. And some of them won't drink anything but craft beer now because of it. Now they may still only drink, cream ale and light lager, but they definitely prefer buying it from the smaller craft breweries.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think, once people get a taste for what real good crafted beer is, you'll never go back to the mass produced stuff. Anytime I can, I always try to go right to the source and enjoy whatever the local brewer is putting together, try to take away some 4 packs, whatever the case may be. You're making a difference there clearly in that area. So
Yeah, absolutely.
kudos to you, man.
Yeah,
Kudos.
thanks.
And of course, opening up in COVID era, that of course I'm sure had its challenges as well, right?
Oh yeah, it was a weird 9 month soft opening. When we started, it was 2017. We bought the building. Didn't make a lot of progress that year. Most of 2018, I spent working on getting a loan that included a chemical cleanup. This is a former gas station.
Okay.
And so spent basically the entire year of 2019 building out. We did a lot of work ourselves as far as like the framing and all that went, and hired out some of the trades. And it got to the 1st of March of 2020, and we had the painters in, and so it was a lot of, the detail work. And it was like, holy smokes, we're going to be able to be open by summer. And then a week later, the entire world shut down.
Yeah.
And so we decided to slow that down and focused on building out a patio, and ended up not opening until October. And we kept it carry out and patio only through that winter into probably, I think it was about June when we finally opened up inside. We felt comfortable enough with it. We've got kids, they were in elementary and middle school at the time, and myself having a full-time job outside of this. And there were a lot of vectors of attack for COVID. So we were trying to keep everybody as healthy as we could, but opened up inside full-time that summer of 2021.
Yeah, and your story is not unlike a lot of other breweries that opened in that time frame. Acquire the property a year or two before COVID hits. Struggle through COVID, and here you are, 4.5 years later. You've made it through. You're rocking and rolling, and still making beer. So that's pretty awesome. So the name is intriguing to me. How did you come up with the name Feed Store Beer Company?
So the building was owned by the same family from like 1939 until 2017 when we bought it. And it was known as Holtzclaw Standard Station. It was a gas station. It was run by the couple that bought it, and then eventually their sons. And when I was a kid, they sold a lot of animal feed out of here, and that was a good amount of the business that they did. So it just kind of became known as the feed store. And it was, I got to run down to the feed store and grab this or that, or get some crickets and some, night crawlers to go fishing. And so when we bought the building, we didn't have a name, and we were brainstorming names, and I just kept coming back to that. I was like, well, that's what I've always known it as, is just the feed store. So we ended up sticking on that, and the branding has gone over really well, and the community has really embraced it. And it's fun to get a lot of stories about the previous owners, from a wide variety, wide generations of people that come in that, spent their time here. They, we're across the street from the high school. So people would come down to buy lunch back in the 60s and 70s. And, it was the deer check station for hunting back when we had to do that in person. And so there's a lot of good stories that have come through this place.
That's awesome. That's one of the things I love about rural America too. I mean, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, honestly. I live in a town of 1,000 people now. Love small town living. Like, we've got one gentleman who he owns an antique store here in town. He keeps track of like all the history. So he's got, photographs from back at the turn of the century up until now. And he keeps track of, all the things that are moving around in the town. And it's just fascinating to have, that history and that background. And then you keeping that alive with that naming and having that history. So you grew up in Bloomfield then, it sounds like.
Yeah.
So, and it's cool too that you took something that was, we'll call it historical, that wasn't really being used for anything, and now you've repurposed it. You've made it something that is usable again and still has that little tinge of history that Bloomfield knows and recognizes. How large a space do you have in the tap room, and then how large is your outdoor seating area?
The tap room's, I think it's about 3,000 square feet. The building's 45 by 60, and the brewery's cut out of that. And then the patio is about 2,500 square feet. It
Nice.
basically was, the front had a horseshoe drive around it, and that was where the pump island was for the gas station. And that had to all be taken out for the cleanup. And they actually dug a hole 45 feet square and 10 feet deep to take out contaminated soil. And we just filled that back in with sand, covered it over with gravel, and put a fence around it, and a patio with a fire pit.
Okay. Was that something that the previous owners had to take care of mitigating that, or was that something you had to take care of?
Well, thankfully, and the lesson here is to do your due diligence when buying commercial property. We'd had an assessment done on the property prior to our purchase, environmental safety assessment phase one, where basically they kind of do a survey of the property and interview the owners and previous owners if they can, to find out if it's possible that it's contaminated. And because it was a gas station and service station, that was not only possible, but highly likely. The tanks had been removed 20 years prior, but the state had lost the documentation for that. The previous owner had actually done it through a grant, and he had a letter from the state thanking him for removing them. But that was back in the 90s, so it was all hard copies of everything, and they didn't have it on hand. So when we went to get our SBA loan, they said, well, we need to do a phase two to see how contaminated this is and where we got to go from there. So I contacted the state. We had further testing done that, cost us a decent amount of money. Then the state environmental agency, IDEM, contacted me and said that they were actually going to pick up the bill for it because the previous owner had passed away between us purchasing the property and this time. And so there was nobody to be held accountable for it. And so it's called a trust fund that is for purposes like that. And a lot of gas station owners, years and years ago had insurance for those sorts of things as well. So they ended up using this trust fund to come in, and they took out 1,800 tons of contaminated soil. They hadn't pumped gas here in 35 years. But when they broke the concrete driveway cap that was over that soil, it smelled like somebody had just dumped a barrel full of gasoline that day.
That's crazy.
Stuff sticks around.
I mean, that's fortunate that Lady Luck was kind of on your side in that sense, right? I mean,
we wouldn't be here if we would have had to pay for it ourselves. I would have just flipped the property and done something else with my time.
Yeah, really. People I don't think realize necessarily like how much behind the scenes has to be done to a property in order to get it to a point where you can be a commercial brewery. I mean, it's not just like you had there. You've got your previous commercial owner. You probably had to go through and modify water lines.
Yeah, we replaced all of the utilities coming in here, put in a bigger water line, bigger gas line, more electricity. We went from I think they had 100 amp service. We put in 600 amps of 3-phase for that. Yeah, everything.
But it also probably takes a long time to get through all the processes too, right? Waiting for permits for this and inspections on this. And I mean, that can take months and months and months on top of that.
Oh, yeah. We had to get an easement from the neighboring property, and that's a restaurant, a fast food restaurant with a drive-through. And he was worried that the easement was going to require him to shut down his drive-through while they did the work. And so he didn't want to sign it. And so there was a lot of back and forth there between me and him and the electric company. And finally, we, convinced him that it wasn't going to impact him at all. And so that was a relief.
Yeah, certainly. You mentioned that the people have accepted that. Did that take a little bit of time for a brewery to come to a small town and, not have that stigma of, well, we got another bar opening up?
No, it was not nearly as bad as I expected. Or rather, I didn't know it would be bad, but I was worried that we wouldn't get a ton of local support and that it would be more, people coming from outside. And because it is a small conservative town, and we really didn't hear a ton of that. Another bar coming in, and there was a little bit of it, but we closed before the restaurant next door most nights. In the summertime, we're open till 10 on the weekends, but we close at 9 during the week, and in the wintertime, 9 on the weekends. We've got a family, we want to be home with our kids and don't want to be out all night.
Yeah, for sure. And the craft beer drinker isn't the kind of person that's going to go in and slam 6 or 8 beers with the intent of trying to get drunk.
Right.
They're out there for community and camaraderie and enjoying some good craft. So I think once people kind of get over that stigma of, well, it's alcohol, it's out, I think people really understand that it's a good thing. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I started homebrewing a couple of years ago. So what advice would you have for somebody that's just starting out in homebrewing?
I've always tried to keep 2 things in mind with homebrewing. One is something my dad always taught me about life, was to use the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. And the other was something I read in The Complete Joy of Homebrewing by Charlie Papazian, is relax, don't worry, have a homebrew. It's not the end of the world. Even if things don't turn out the way you want them, it's probably going to be okay. You're probably going to make decent beer, even if it's not exactly what you wanted. And even if it's not decent, it's not the end of the world. Especially at the homebrew scale, if it's wasted, you're throwing out $30, $40, $50 worth of beer, and you're probably learning something from it.
Mm-hmm. So your personal system when you started homebrewing, did you use like a 3-vessel system, or did you have something more customized, like an all-in-one?
No, I had a three vessel system that I kind of pieced together. I had some friends that got out of the hobby and gave me a bunch of equipment. And then I kind of grew it over time. Ended up with a 15-gallon kettle. So I was doing 10-gallon batches. And my mash tun was a big 15-gallon igloo cooler. And then I had a keggle that a friend of mine had given me. It was a converted keg, the top cut out that I used for a hot liquor tank. And yeah, so that was once I decided I was done bottling and wanted to get into kegging. I started talking to a buddy of mine, and he was like, "Well, I don't brew anymore, so you can have all this stuff." And he saved me a lot of money.
Yeah, it can get expensive really fast, that's for sure.
Yeah,
So, how large of a brewing system do you have there at Feed Store?
we've got a 7 barrel brew house, and the fermenters are actually all double sized. We bought it used from a brewery in Denver that closed, and so the fermenters are all double sized. Most of our beers, we just do a single batch into them, but we have the capability to double batch, which we do for we've got one flagship beer that is on year round. That's our standard cream ale. And we brew that probably 6 times a year, a double batch of it. So it's about a third of the beer that we make is just that one. And everything else, we mostly just single batch though.
Now, is that the knee high?
No, the knee high is a corn
The
lager that
corn
we do
lager, that's
seasonally in the summertime. And the cream ale, it's just called standard cream ale because this was a standard fuel station back in the day. So that's where that name came from.
okay.
They're very similar beers. It's kind of funny when somebody says that they can drink one, but they can't drink the other because the main difference is just the yeast that we use in it.
That's interesting. So this season, I'm trying to dig into yeast strains a little bit and learn a little bit more. Last season, it was all about hops. So it's just fascinating, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think the thing that I'm getting stuck in is that there are so many permutations that you can do. I mean, there are what, 400 commercial varieties of hops, there are 90 commercial varieties of yeast. I mean, you've got all the different kinds of malts and grains.
Oh, absolutely.
I
And new
mean,
stuff coming out all the time.
all the time. Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned your flagship, which is the cream ale. What other beers do you have on tap usually?
We don't keep any other beers on tap consistently. We rotate them a lot, but we've always got, a darker beer. We've got like an amberish beer, usually something fruity or a little more interesting, and a couple of IPAs, usually like a West Coast IPA and a hazy IPA. And then we do keep a couple of ciders on that we get from a local cidery for the folks that don't care for beer.
Okay. What's the local cidery that you use?
Friendly Beast Cider in Bloomington. They're
Okay.
they're a small cidery right there on the south edge of town, and we've used them since we first opened up.
So do you have 6 taps then? 8 taps?
No, we've got 16 taps. Two of them are ciders. Right now, one of them is root beer. That the kid that washes kegs for me wanted to make a root beer, so we did up it's a vanilla maple root beer.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah, it turned out really nice. And we've got a couple lines that are empty right now, but we usually have about 13 beers on.
Keeps you busy on the side outside of your real job.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So do you have someone that helps you with the brewing then?
Yeah. We've got one basically full-time employee. Anytime we're open, she's usually working at the bar, but then she also helps with brewing and cellar work.
Okay. Do you have food at the brewery then, or do you bring in food trucks like most breweries do?
We do food trucks, and we've had really good luck with that over the last few years, especially considering where we're located. There's a handful that are local to the county, and then we get some in from Bloomington and the surrounding counties. So generally, we've got a food truck anytime we're open. Today we don't because the owner was actually sick. He messaged us last night he couldn't come, and it's hard to try and schedule somebody last minute to come out. But we usually have a rotation of food trucks and it's a wide variety. So it allows us to have something different every day. Whereas if we had a restaurant in here, I wouldn't be churning out a large menu of items.
Right. It's really a challenge to have a food arm of your brewery. I mean, it's really a
Yeah.
whole nother beast, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I've seen friends that own breweries that didn't think the food was going to be a big part of it and put a kitchen in, and it ends up being most of the work. I mean, you've got to staff the kitchen, you've ordered fresh ingredients every week, and it's a big beast for sure.
So there's always a crossroad too, I think, because you either have to decide, are you going to be a brewery that has, food trucks, or you're going to be a full-on restaurant that serves craft beer. So you have to at some point make that decision really what is going to be your focus, because that's going to take
Yeah.
up all the time.
Yeah. I do not want to run a kitchen.
Last call.
It's nearly time to wrap things up, But first, one more for the road. This episode, I'm drinking Fall from Maine Beer Company, located in Freeport. From the brewer, flavors of dark chocolate and coffee with notes of coconut, cedar, citrus, and blueberries. Brewed with Ethiopian cold brew from our neighbors at Coffee by Design. Without further delay, well, this is a 5.6% ABV coffee stout. I'm no stranger to the beers that Maine Beer Company puts out. I happened to find this one in a seasonal discount section at Gay's Hops and Schnapps, which is one of the local bottle shop chains in Indiana that I check out from time to time. So this poured a very nice, deep dark chocolate color. It has a nice, fluffy, mocha-colored head on it. On the nose, it's got a great chocolate aroma with a little bit of coffee intermingled. I'm excited about this one. So, first sip impression. Okay, that's interesting. I was expecting a little bit more body on the beer. Comes across to me as more of a light to medium bodied beer. And I guess thinking about it, at 5.6%, I wouldn't expect it to be super heavy. It has a pleasant coffee flavor on the palate. Not overly so. I would say that even with that light-bodied mouthfeel, it does have a kind of a softness to it, which is really pleasant. So on the finish of the beer, the coffee continues to be present there, and it leaves your mouth with just a little bit of a coffee, chocolatey bitterness to it. Not unpleasant, but just reminds you that this is a coffee stout. Interestingly, I do get a little bit of that berry vibe that was described. It must be the hops that are imparting that little bit of fruitiness. Some coffee stouts come across as being very aggressive with that coffee flavor. This one is very balanced. I can get the Ethiopian cold brew vibe from it. I'm not a coffee connoisseur per se. I drink a lot of coffee. I grind my own coffee beans. So I do know the difference between certain regions of coffee, and this certainly gives me that Ethiopian vibe. With this ABV, it's not going to fill you up, and it's not going to make you kind of be done for the night. You could have one or maybe two of these and still feel pretty good about yourself. I really enjoy this one. Again, I'm a big fan of coffee, and when I have the opportunity to have a coffee stout, I'm always looking for that great balance. And I really feel like fall brings that to the table. So I give this one 4 tasters out of 5 on the flight board. Cheers, Maine Beer Company. I'm always looking for new craft beverages to review. So if you've got one from your favorite local craft brewery, meadery, or cidery you'd like me to drink and describe, reach out and let me know. That's all for this episode of the 5 Beer Plan. With so many podcasts out there, thanks for choosing to listen to mine. Join me next time as I get sour. I continue on with my discussion with Steve Corbin from Feed Store Beer Company, continue the homebrew project, and review another beer. Remember to hit the subscribe button on your preferred podcast platform to be notified of new episodes. Follow me on Instagram as well, 5 Beer Plan 2022, to see what is happening on my personal ale trail. I'd love to hear from you, and there are several ways you may do so. Leave a comment for this episode on Spotify, direct message me on Instagram, or email me directly, 5beerplan@frontier.com. Be sure to support your local breweries, choose your beers wisely, and drink them responsibly. Until next time, keep walking your ale trail, and stay thirsty, my friends.